If you are ready to become the person you know you were born to become, I created the Second Life to give you a complete path built on timeless principles of success so you can finally transform for real and begin building greater wealth, stronger health, deeper relationships, inner peace, and a life that fully reflects your true potential. Click the first link in the description and step into the person you were meant to be. There is a number your life continues to return to. No matter how many times you attempt to rise beyond it, you may experience temporary progress, feel momentum building, and then suddenly something seems to pull you back. It feels frustrating, almost confusing, as if an invisible force is keeping you in place. You have likely told yourself a simple explanation. If I just work harder, things will eventually change. But look carefully. Haven't there been moments when you worked harder than ever and nothing truly changed? Or worse, you earned more only to lose it eventually change? But look carefully. Haven't there been moments when you worked harder than ever and nothing truly changed? Or worse, you earned more only to lose it just as quickly and return to the same level? This is where most people become trapped. They focus entirely on effort, on external conditions, on forcing different outcomes without ever questioning the deeper pattern beneath it all. Because the truth is, your income is not only earned, it is permitted. And that distinction changes everything. Think carefully about your past. Different jobs, different environments, perhaps even different cities. Yet, the number always seems to settle within a familiar range. It may expand slightly, contract slightly, but it rarely breaks free for long, almost as if something unseen keeps correcting it. That force is not luck. It is not coincidence. It is a pattern, a deeply rooted expectation that determines how far you go, what you tolerate, and how you respond when life is not luck. It is not coincidence. It is a pattern, a deeply rooted expectation that determines how far you go, what you tolerate, and how you respond when life begins to shift. And until you recognize it, you will continue to live inside it. You rarely notice it directly. Instead, it reveals itself quietly. The opportunities you hesitate to take, the risks you avoid, the prices you are afraid to charge, the moments you let pass because something inside whispers, that isn't meant for you. Most people believe they are making logical decisions, but beneath those decisions is a silent agreement, a belief about what feels normal, what feels safe, and what feels possible. And that belief constantly pulls your results back toward what feels familiar. Picture this clearly. If your income doubled overnight, would it remain there? Or would something happen? Poor decisions, missed opportunities, bad timing that slowly brings you back down? Not because you lack talent, but because you are not yet aligned with that level. This is the part few people truly want to face, because it means the limitation is not outside of you. It is not your job, not because you lack talent, but because you are not yet aligned with that level. This is the part few people truly want to face, because it means the limitation is not outside of you. It is not your job, your employer, or the economy. It is something much closer, something you carry into every choice, every negotiation, every opportunity. And the longer it remains unquestioned, the stronger it becomes. Every time you settle, the pattern deepens. Every moment you hesitate, the boundary grows stronger until eventually it no longer feels like a limit at all. It simply feels like reality. But reality, as most people experience it, is often nothing more than repetition. The same patterns repeating again and again until they become familiar enough to feel permanent. And what feels permanent is rarely challenged. This is why some individuals rise rapidly while others remain stuck. Not because one deserves more, but because one operates from a different internal standard, a different expectation rapidly while others remain stuck. Not because one deserves more, but because one operates from a different internal standard, a different expectation of what is possible, acceptable, and inevitable. That standard was not created overnight. It was built slowly through experience, through what you witnessed, what you were told, and what you repeatedly believed, shaping your sense of what your level is without you ever consciously deciding it. Every action you take is filtered through that level: how much you charge, what you believe you deserve, how confidently you communicate, what opportunities you believe you qualify for. All of it reflects something deeper than skill. It reflects belief and qualify for. All of it reflects something deeper than skill. It reflects belief. And until that belief changes, your results will continue to mirror it with precision. You may change strategies, environments, even entire industries. Yet the outcome will often feel strangely familiar, as though life keeps returning you to the same place. This is why chasing money directly often creates frustration, because money is not the root. It is the reflection. It reveals what is happening beneath the surface, not what is causing it. So the real question is not, how do I make more money? The real question is, what is keeping me at this level? And that question demands honesty. Not surface level explanations, but a deeper examination of how you think, how you decide, and how you respond under pressure. Because once you begin to recognize the think, how you decide, and how you respond under pressure. Because once you begin to recognize the pattern, something powerful happens. You realize the number you have been stuck at is not fixed. It is not assigned to you. It is not permanent. It is simply the result of something that can be changed. But change does not come through force. It begins with awareness, with seeing clearly what was once invisible, with recognizing the habits, the thoughts, and the silent agreements that have shaped your results all along. And then slowly, intentionally, you begin to shift them. Not instantly, not dramatically, but enough to create movement, enough to expand what feels normal, enough to stretch beyond the boundary that once held you in place. And as that internal shift begins, the external results begin to follow. Opportunities begin to appear differently, decisions become clearer, your actions become more decisive, and without forcing it, you begin moving into a new range, one that once seemed unreachable. This is not luck. It is not chance. It is alignment. Because the moment your internal it, you begin moving into a new range, one that once seemed unreachable. This is not luck. It is not chance. It is alignment. Because the moment your internal standard changes, your results are forced to follow, and the number you once believed defined you becomes the very thing you leave behind. Most people never realize how early these limits were formed. Long before you ever earned your first paycheck, your mind was already collecting evidence about what kind of life was realistic for someone like you. You absorbed opinions about money, success, failure, risk, and security without even noticing it. And over time, those ideas stopped feeling like opinions. They began to feel like truth. You saw how people around you reacted to wealth. Some admired it, some feared it, some quietly believed it belonged only to certain people. And without realizing it, you inherited emotional patterns that still influence your decisions today. This is why two people can face the same opportunity and respond in completely different ways. One sees possibility, the other sees danger. The opportunity itself is not the difference. The internal conditioning is. One person has trained themselves to move toward expansion, while the other has been conditioned to protect familiarity at all costs. And familiarity is powerful because the mind confuses what is familiar with what is safe. Even when your current situation causes frustration, a part of you may still cling to it simply because it is known. This is why transformation often feels uncomfortable at first. You are not only changing your actions, you are challenging an identity that has been reinforced for years. The moment you begin thinking beyond your old level, resistance appears. Doubt grows louder. Fear becomes more persuasive. Old habits suddenly feel tempting again. Not because you are failing, but because the mind is attempting to restore what feels familiar. Most people interpret this resistance as a sign to stop. They assume discomfort means they are moving in the wrong direction. But in reality, discomfort is often evidence that the old pattern is losing control. Growth rarely feels natural. Comfort is often evidence that the old pattern is losing control. Growth rarely feels natural in the beginning. At first, it feels uncertain, it feels unfamiliar, it feels unstable. Yet this instability is temporary, because the more you repeat a new standard, the more natural it becomes. Confidence is not something people are born with. It is built through repeated evidence. Every time you act in alignment with a higher version of yourself, even in small ways, you strengthen a new identity. And eventually, what once felt impossible begins to feel expected. This is how real change occurs. Not through motivation alone, but through repetition, powerful enough to replace old conditioning. The person who changes their life is usually not the person who suddenly becomes fearless overnight. It is the person who continues acting despite fear long enough for a new standard to take root. And once that new standard becomes familiar, everything begins to shift. The conversations you tolerate change. The opportunities you pursue change. The way you carry yourself changes. Even your sense of time changes because you stop thinking only about surviving the present and begin building intentionally for the future. You become less reactive intentionally for the future. You become less reactive and more deliberate, less desperate and more focused. You stop chasing validation from people who cannot see your vision because your direction no longer depends on external approval. It becomes anchored internally, and that internal certainty changes the energy behind every action you take. Others notice this immediately, even if they cannot explain it. They sense that something about you has changed. Your decisions carry more conviction. Your words carry more clarity. Your presence carries more certainty. And people naturally respond differently to certainty because certainty signals stability, leadership, and trust. This is why personal transformation affects every area of life, not just income. When your internal standard rises, your relationships change, your habits change, your priorities change. You stop negotiating with the version of yourself that wants comfort without growth. And for the first time, your daily actions begin matching the future you claim to want. That is the moment momentum begins. Not when life suddenly becomes easy, but when your thoughts, beliefs, and actions stop fighting each other. Because once inner conflict is removed, energy that was once wasted on hesitation becomes available for progress. And progress repeated consistently creates results that once seemed impossible. Most people spend years waiting for external proof before they believe in themselves. But the truth is, belief must come first. Action follows belief. Belief must come first. Action follows belief. Results follow action. And once the results appear, the cycle strengthens itself. This is how a new reality is built, not through wishing, but through alignment repeated long enough to become identity. And when that identity changes, your life begins to reflect it with precision. The opportunities that once intimidated you now feel normal. The goals that once felt distant now feel expected. The level you once struggled to reach becomes your new foundation. And from that foundation, you begin building again, this time without the invisible ceiling that once controlled your life. At this stage, many people make a critical mistake. They begin to see progress, they feel themselves changing, and they assume the work is complete. But transformation is not proven by temporary emotion. It is proven by consistency. Anyone can feel motivated for a few days. Anyone can think differently after hearing something inspiring. The real test is whether you continue to hold your new standard when life becomes difficult again. Because life will test every belief you claim to hold. There will be moments when old fears return, moments when results slow down, moments when uncertainty makes the past look comfortable again. And in those moments, most people unconsciously return to the identity they spent years reinforcing. Not because they truly want to, but because repetition is powerful. The old pattern knows how to survive. This is why discipline matters more than emotion. Emotion changes constantly. Some days you will feel confident. Other days you will question every moving, even when certainty disappears temporarily. It keeps your actions aligned with your future instead of your current mood. And over time, disciplined action reshapes identity far more effectively than short bursts of motivation ever could. The people who create extraordinary lives are rarely the ones who felt inspired every day. They are the ones who refused to stop when inspiration faded. They continued learning when progress felt slow. They continued improving when nobody noticed. They continued acting like the person they intended to become long before external results confirmed it. This is the hidden difference between those who transform and those who remain trapped in cycles. One group waits to feel ready, the other acts before readiness appears. One group demands certainty before commitment. The other understands that certainty is created through movement, not before it. You must also recognize that every decision either strengthens your future, no neutral direction. Every time you repeat excuse, you reinforce the old identity. Every time you act despite resistance, you strengthen the new one. And these small moments matter more than people realize because identity is built through repetition, not grand declarations. A person does not become confident overnight. They become confident keeping promises to themselves repeatedly. A person does not become successful through one opportunity. They become successful by consistently responding to opportunities differently than they once did. And eventually, these repeated actions create a completely different life trajectory. This is why patience is essential. Many people abandon growth because they expect immediate evidence. They want dramatic change in days or weeks. But most lasting transformation happens quietly at first. The internal shift happens long before the external result becomes visible. Just as a seed grows beneath the surface before it ever breaks through the ground, your new identity internally before your life visibly changes. If you quit during this stage, you interrupt the process before the result has time to appear. But if you persist, if you continue reinforcing the new standard, even when progress feels invisible, eventually the breakthrough comes. And when it comes, people often call it sudden success. They see the result, but not the years of internal change that created it. What appears sudden externally was usually built slowly internally. The confidence, the discipline, the mindset, the standards, the habits. All of it was developed long before anyone else could see it. This is why lasting success is never truly accidental. It is constructed through repeated alignment between vision and action. And once that alignment becomes stable, opportunities begin multiplying naturally. The world suddenly changed, but because you changed the way you respond to it. You notice possibilities you once ignored. You move faster on visions that once intimidated you. You stop shrinking yourself to fit environments that no longer match your future. There is also a deeper shift that begins to happen. You stop measuring your life only by immediate comfort and begin measuring it by growth. Temporary discomfort no longer controls your choices because you understand that comfort without progress eventually becomes its own form of suffering. So instead of asking, what feels easiest right now, you begin asking, what moves me closer to the person I intend to become? That question changes everything because it forces you to think beyond emotion, beyond fear, beyond old conditioning. It places your focus on direction instead of temporary feeling. And direction, repeated daily, has the power to completely transform a life. This is why your future is not created in one dramatic moment. Quiet decisions nobody else sees. The mornings when you choose discipline instead of delay. The conversations where you finally speak with confidence instead of hesitation. The opportunities you pursue even when fear remains present. The standards you refuse to lower even when it would be easier to settle. These moments seem small individually, yet together they shape identity. And identity shapes destiny. Once you understand this, you stop waiting for life to change randomly. You realize that every thought you reinforce, every action you repeat, and every standard you accept is either building the future you want or maintaining the one you already have. And when you fully accept that responsibility, something powerful. You stop seeing yourself as someone hoping for a better life someday. You begin seeing yourself as the person actively creating it now. From this point forward, your awareness begins to change the way you see everything around you. Situations that once appeared random begin to reveal patterns. You start noticing how people speak about themselves, how they limit their own possibilities without realizing it, how they repeat the same beliefs until those beliefs become their reality. And as you observe this in others, you begin to recognize how often you once did the same. You realize that most limitations are first accepted mentally long before they appear physically. A person rarely reaches a ceiling they have not already imagined internally. The external condition is usually the final expression of an internal agreement repeated over time. This is why changing your thinking is not a superficial exercise. It is the foundation upon which every result is built. At first, this realization can feel overwhelming because it removes the comfort of blaming circumstances alone. But it also gives you something far more valuable in return: control. Because if your current reality was shaped through repeated thought, repeated action, and repeated standards, then a new reality can be built the same way, slowly, intentionally, consistently. This is where true responsibility begins, not the kind rooted in guilt or pressure, but the kind rooted in awareness. You stop asking why life has not changed yet and begin asking whether your daily habits actually reflect the future you claim to want. You stop focusing only on outcomes and begin paying attention to the process producing them. And the deeper you examine that process, the clearer your patterns become. You notice where you still hesitate, where you still seek permission, where you still lower yourself to remain accepted by people who are uncomfortable with growth. These patterns become impossible to ignore once awareness expands. And although uncomfortable, this awareness is necessary because what remains unconscious cannot be changed. Many people spend their entire lives reacting automatically to fear, doubt, and habit without ever questioning where those reactions came from. They assume their behavior is simply their personality. But much of what people call personality is often conditioning repeated so many times it feels permanent. Once you understand this, you stop treating your current identity as fixed. You begin seeing it as something that can be reshaped deliberately. That understanding changes the way you approach growth. You stop expecting perfection and start focusing on progress. You stop interpreting setbacks as failure and begin seeing them as feedback. Because every challenge now reveals something useful. It shows you where your old conditioning still exists. It shows you where your standards still need reinforcement. It shows you where fear still attempts to control your decisions. And instead of avoiding these moments, you begin using them. You understand that pressure reveals identity. When circumstances become difficult, your true level of belief becomes visible. Anyone can think positively when life feels easy. But when uncertainty appears, your habits reveal what you genuinely believe about yourself. This is why growth requires honesty, not performance, not pretending, real honesty. The willingness to admit where you still think small, where you still avoid responsibility, where you still wait for certainty before taking action. Because the moment you stop lying to yourself, real change becomes possible. And something remarkable happens when this honesty combines with disciplined action. You begin developing trust in yourself, not temporary confidence based on emotion, but deeper trust built through evidence. You trust yourself because you continue moving forward even when motivation fades. You trust yourself because you no longer abandon your standards the moment life becomes comfortable. That self-trust becomes one of the most powerful forces in your life. Because once you trust yourself, hesitation loses strength. Fear loses influence. External opinions lose control. You stop constantly searching for reassurance because your direction is no longer dependent on approval. It is supported internally by the standards you have repeatedly chosen to live by. And when a person reaches this stage, their energy changes completely. They no longer move through life with desperation. They stop chasing every distraction. They stop needing immediate results to stay committed. Instead, they develop calm focus. They understand that meaningful growth compounds over time, and because of this understanding, they stop sabotaging long-term progress for short-term comfort. This is where momentum becomes powerful, not forced momentum driven by pressure, but natural momentum created through alignment. Your thoughts begin supporting your actions instead of fighting them. Your habits begin reinforcing your goals instead of contradicting them. Your environment begins reflecting the standards you now refuse to compromise. And as this alignment deepens, your life starts changing in ways that once seemed impossible. Not because you became someone completely different overnight, but because you finally stopped returning to the version of yourself that kept you trapped. The old identity loses influence each time you refuse to feed it. The new identity strengthens each time you act in alignment with it. Eventually, what once required intense discipline begins to feel normal. The habits that once felt difficult become automatic. The standards that once felt uncomfortable become expected. And the level you once dreamed about becomes your reality, not through luck, but through repeated internal transformation expressed consistently over time. This is how people truly change their lives, not through one motivational moment, through temporary emotion, but through the daily decision to think differently, act differently, and refuse to settle back into the patterns that once defined them. As this transformation continues, another shift begins to take place, one that is even more important than external success. You begin to realize that growth is not only about achieving more, it is about becoming someone capable of sustaining more. Because many people can reach a higher level temporarily, but very few can remain there without internally changing first. This is why lasting success always demands emotional maturity alongside ambition. If your mind is still attached to old fears, old insecurities, and old reactions, then even new opportunities can become overwhelming. The external world may offer expansion, but internally you will still feel pulled toward limitation. And eventually, without awareness, you may sabotage the very things you once prayed for. You can see this pattern everywhere. People who finally receive opportunities they claim to want, only to shrink under pressure once those opportunities arrive. People who reach new levels financially, yet people who achieve success outwardly while internally still believing they are not enough. The external change happened, but the identity never fully evolved with it. This is why internal development must always come first. The stronger your inner foundation becomes, the more responsibility, pressure, and opportunity you can handle without collapsing back into old patterns. You stop reacting emotionally to every obstacle. You stop interpreting temporary setbacks as permanent defeat. Instead, you develop stability, and stability creates endurance. That endurance becomes one of your greatest advantages because most people stop too soon. They quit during uncertainty. They retreat when results slow down. They return to old habits the moment progress becomes uncomfortable. But the person who continues moving with discipline through those moments eventually separates themselves from the crowd entirely. Not because they're naturally superior, but because long enough for growth to compound. And growth always compounds. Every disciplined action strengthens the next one. Every difficult decision handled correctly increases your confidence for future challenges. Every moment you refuse to abandon your standards builds a stronger identity. At first, the changes may appear small, a different response during pressure, a little more confidence during conversations, a stronger ability to stay focused instead of becoming distracted emotionally. But over time, these small internal shifts create massive external differences. Because your life is always moving in the direction of your dominant habits and beliefs. This is why protecting your mind becomes essential. Once you begin building a higher standard for yourself, you can no longer feed your mind with constant negativity, distraction, and limitation without consequence. What you repeatedly consume eventually shapes how you think, and how you think shapes what you tolerate, pursue, and create. The drifting person rarely notices this influence. They allow outside opinions, fear-driven conversations, and endless distraction to control their mental environment. And then they wonder why their focus disappears, why their confidence weakens, why their goals begin feeling distant again. But the mind responds to repetition, whether the influence is empowering or destructive. You must become intentional about what enters your mind you listen to, the conversations you entertain, the ideas you repeat, the environments you remain inside. All of these quietly shape your standards over time, and standards determine direction. Once you understand this, you stop treating personal growth like a temporary phase. It becomes a lifestyle. You realize that maintaining a higher level requires continuous awareness, not constant struggle, but conscious direction. You no longer allow random influences to decide the quality of your thinking because you understand how deeply thought affects reality. And gradually, something else changes. You stop needing external validation to continue improving. In the past, you may have depended on praise, recognition, or immediate results to stay motivated. But now your discipline becomes internal. You continue because growth itself has become part of your identity. You no longer improve only when someone is watching. You improve because that is who you are becoming. This internal shift creates freedom. Freedom from constantly comparing yourself to others. Freedom from needing approval before taking action. Freedom from the emotional instability that comes from tying your self-worth to temporary outcomes. You become more grounded, more focused, and more resilient because your direction is no longer controlled by outside reactions. And when a person reaches this level, opportunities begin to expand naturally around them. Not magically, but logically. Their consistency builds trust. Their mindset creates clarity. Their discipline increases reliability. Others begin recognizing them as someone capable of carrying greater responsibility because their behavior repeatedly demonstrates it. This is how influence grows. This is how leadership develops. Not in values, actions, and standards. People trust those who remain steady under pressure. They follow those who act with clarity during uncertainty. They respect those who continue moving forward without constantly collapsing emotionally every time life becomes difficult. And eventually you realize that the greatest transformation was never only about money, status, or achievement. It was about becoming someone stronger internally, someone capable of directing their own mind instead of being controlled by fear, habit, and circumstance. Someone who no longer waits to pursue a greater life. That is when true power begins. The moment you stop seeing growth as something outside of you and begin understanding that the quality of your life will always reflect the person you repeatedly choose to become. Once a person reaches this level of awareness, they begin to understand something most people never fully realize. Life is constantly responding to identity, not temporary emotion, not occasional effort. Identity. The version of yourself you repeatedly reinforce through thought, behavior, and expectation eventually becomes the foundation of your reality. This is why short-term change is common, but permanent transformation is rare. Many people attempt to change their circumstances while secretly remaining loyal to the same identity that created them. They want different results while emotionally attached to familiar habits, familiar excuses, and familiar ways of thinking. And because identity always seeks consistency, the old pattern eventually pulls them back. The person who truly changes breaks this cycle differently. They stop negotiating with the past version of themselves. They stop treating growth like an experiment they can abandon whenever discomfort appears with the past version of themselves. They stop treating growth like an experiment they can abandon whenever discomfort appears. Instead, they make an internal decision that the old standard is no longer acceptable. And once that decision becomes absolute, their behavior begins changing permanently. This does not mean the journey becomes easy. In many ways, growth becomes more demanding because awareness increases responsibility. You can no longer pretend not to see your own patterns. You recognize when fear is speaking. You recognize when procrastination is disguising itself as caution. You recognize when comfort is quietly replacing ambition. And because you see it clearly, you are forced to make a choice repeatedly. Will you return to what is familiar or continue becoming who you said you wanted to be? That question appears again and again throughout life. Not once, but daily. You wanted to be. That question appears again and again throughout life. Not once, but daily. In your routines, in your decisions, in the standards you tolerate, in the opportunities you pursue or avoid. And over time, the accumulation of those choices shapes everything. Most people underestimate the power of small, repeated decisions because they focus only on dramatic moments. But your future is rarely changed in one massive action. It is usually shaped through consistent behaviors, repeated long enough to become identity. The way you think when nobody is watching, the habits you maintain, the way you think when nobody is watching, the habits you maintain when motivation disappears, the standards you hold when compromise would be easier. These moments define direction, and direction maintained consistently eventually becomes destiny. This is why self-respect grows through action, not intention alone. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, your identity strengthens. Every time you act in alignment with your future instead of your temporary emotion, you build trust internally. And that trust changes the way you move through life. You stop second-guessing yourself constantly. You stop needing endless reassurance before taking action. You stop depending on perfect conditions to begin moving forward. Instead, you develop quiet certainty, the kind built through repeated evidence that you can rely on yourself even during difficulty. That certainty becomes visible in everything you do. The way you communicate changes. The way you handle pressure changes. The way you respond to setbacks changes. You become less emotional about temporary obstacles because you understand that one difficult moment does not define your direction anymore. And this emotional stability gives you an advantage most people never develop. While that one difficult moment does not define your direction anymore. And this emotional stability gives you an advantage most people never develop. While others panic during uncertainty, you remain focused. While others retreat at the first sign of discomfort, you continue moving. While others allow fear to interrupt consistency, you keep reinforcing your new standard. Over time, this creates separation. Not because you are trying to become better than others, but because consistency naturally produces different outcomes than inconsistency. Discipline creates momentum. Momentum creates confidence. Confidence creates larger action. And larger action creates opportunities that once seemed unreachable. Eventually, the life that once felt difficult to imagine begins feeling normal. The goals that once intimidated you become expectations. The habits that once required discipline once intimidated you become expectations. The habits that once required discipline become automatic. And the standards that once felt uncomfortable become the minimum willing to accept for yourself. This is the moment many people mistake as luck from the outside. They see the result without understanding the internal evolution behind it. They notice the confidence, the success, the opportunities, but they do not see the years spent rebuilding identity, strengthening discipline, and refusing to return to old patterns. Real transformation is rarely dramatic in the beginning. It is quiet, repetitive, often invisible. But every repeated action shapes the mind. Every disciplined decision reinforces identity. Every moment you refuse to betray your future for temporary comfort strengthens the person you are becoming. And eventually, the accumulation becomes undeniable. Your thinking expands, your standards rise, your actions sharpen, your environment changes, your relationships evolve, your opportunities multiply. Not because reality suddenly became unfairly favorable, but because you are no longer operating from the same level of awareness, belief, and behavior that once kept you trapped. Because you are no longer operating from the same level of awareness, belief, and behavior that once kept you trapped. This is why the process matters more than people realize. The person you become while building the future is ultimately what allows you to sustain it once it arrives. Without that internal growth, success becomes unstable. But with it, success becomes natural, because your external life finally matches your internal standard. And once that alignment becomes permanent, you stop chasing a better life as if it exists somewhere outside of you. You realize you have been building it within yourself all along.